Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this special edition of Political Connections. I'm Al Rochelle.
And I'm Yvette Brusual.
And I'm Tampa Bay Times political editor Adam Smith.
Now, over the next hour, we're going to learn more about the three candidates running for Attorney General. Now, we are going to start things off with an opening statement from each candidate. And now, finally, Mr. Bill Wohlsifer, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Bright House Networks, for including me and inviting me to this debate. And I thank Bay News 9. And I thank the candidates for all the preparation I know has gone into this. I am Bill Wohlsifer. I'm the Libertarian candidate. I'm glad that we have three parties included here today, so we've got a full reach to the Florida voters of various points of view. The third party, the Libertarian Party, is the fastest growing party of voter registration in Florida. In fact, it's up 12% recently, while the other two-party registration is shrinking. I moved to Florida in 1985, down from New Jersey. I became a lawyer in 1996. It was actually a career change for me. I was 42 years old when I started to practice law. And prior to that, I'd been self-employed all my adult life, except for 2.5 years as a civil prosecutor with Florida DBPR. And in private practice, I went right into private practice upon graduating. I covered multiple areas of law, from securities law, real estate, criminal, personal injury, foreclosure. I've been on both sides. I've foreclosed and I defended foreclosures. So I bring experience. I've been signing paychecks since 1970s. I've been creating jobs since the 1970s. I've been practicing law since 1996. I live in Tallahassee. I'm anxious for this position. I'm ready for this position. And I'm anxiously looking forward to the moderator's questions and the great debate we're going to have this evening.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Wohlsifer.
All right, let's get to it. To the first question is, how would you approach this job? In years past, different attorney generals have taken their different point of view and their stance on it, but I want to know your philosophy on this job. You'll have 60 seconds to answer. And next for you, sir.
I perceive the principal role of the Attorney General as a protector of civil liberties. Now, we've moved into prosecution as the primary role, but forgetting that civil liberties is first. And I say that because here in Florida, the Fourth Amendment has been practically absolved. We have constitutional free zones around the airports and 100 miles from the border. Consumer protection also includes voter protection, and with that also includes voter access to information, campaign public financing, and beyond prosecution. Prosecution is a huge part, but not the sole responsibility.
Thank you.
Our second question is going to come from one of our viewers. Let's take a listen.
If elected or re-elected, what would be the focus of your next 4 years in office?
We're going to go to Mr. Wohlsifer.
Thank you. What I would do over the next 4 years is the reason I am running. Our Attorney General's office runs well. It's a large machine, almost 1,300 employees with a substantial budget. Mitigate fraud, fighting against crime are traditional. I want to bring some new focus. I want to focus on the debate in Florida's legal affairs that's been omitted, such as same-sex marriage, medicinal use of marijuana, protecting, again, of civil rights. These are issues that are on the forefront of the Attorney General's responsibility, on the front of everyone's mind, and yet we keep turning back to traditional roles.
All right, let's move on to another question. This is our third question, deals with Amendment 2. 60% of the voters need to approve the medical marijuana proposal for it to pass. If it passes, how do you think that bill will affect the Attorney General's office? You will have 30 seconds for this answer. Start with Bill Wohlsifer.
When it passes, it will affect the Attorney General's office in an enormous way, because the Attorney General is responsible for the controlled substance list. We're already at issue with the passage of SB 1030, the so-called Charlotte Weber CDB bill, where we have Schedule I controlled substance for cannabis, yet our legislature has recognized cannabis as having medicinal value. The Attorney General has to fix that. So the implementation of the passage of Amendment 2 is critical for the Attorney General, and I'm the best one to do that because I've been a leader on this issue for patients in Florida.
Let's carry this a step further if we could. We're going to talk about medical marijuana, the amendment specifically. What's your personal view of the medical marijuana amendment? And you've got 1 minute to answer this now, your personal view about the amendment itself. Mr. Wohlsifer.
Thank you. Well, I wrote the Kathy Jordan Medical Cannabis Act in 2012, and that was brought forward in both chambers of the Senate and the House in 2013 and 2014. It did not move forward out of committee, but that's my commitment to what I think of medical cannabis. It is so important for the patients. It's so important to the caregivers who need to care for those patients. Look around and you know, I know everyone knows someone with cancer, someone with ALS. For cancer, we're still using a 30-year-old protocol of chemotherapy and radiation. I brought forward the Kathy Jordan bill, which is much broader than Amendment 2. So what do I think of Amendment 2? I don't think it goes far enough. I'm certainly not concerned about 12-year-olds having access any more than we need to be concerned about minors having access to liquor. Florida can regulate this product as well as it regulates other dangerous or even not so dangerous products.
Moving on now to the fifth question. This one is about felons' rights, another very hot topic that everybody keeps talking about, especially during the election time. Former Governor Charlie Crist made it easier, many people say, for former felons, who have completed their sentence to regain their civil rights. The state has backtracked on that, and now it's a process that can take up to not 1, not 2, but 3 years. Shouldn't it be easier and faster for felons, that's the question, who have completed their sentence to get their rights back? This will be a 30-second response. I've got to move on to Mr. Wohlsifer.
Thank you. I believe in full restoration upon release. I've heard the examples our Attorney General just gave, but let's not forget the person may have already served 20 years. The person is not the same one who committed that crime. If we're going to release these folks back into our community, we got to allow them to become productive members. Now, some people might think restoration of civil rights is a voting right. It's not just that. It's an occupational right, a right to be a hair braider, a hair cutter, to sell used cars. So how are you going to get back on your feet if you have 7 or 5 years of having your hands tied behind your back?
Thank you.
Thanks. Another 30-second question. If one of you is elected, you're going to be serving either with Governor Scott, Governor Crist, or even possibly Governor Wiley. So starting with you, George, what's your biggest disagreement with Rick Scott and with Charlie Crist?
Well, going back to the Crist administration, one thing I like is what we just touched on, that he did restore felon rights upon release. As to what did Mr. Crist do worse, I think he deserted his party for personal reasons when he ran for the Senate and then jumped again. So a little question comes to mind there. As to Governor Scott, Crist, or Wiley, I would look forward to serving with any one of those three.
Let's move on to our next question. The Affordable Care Act still isn't very popular with a lot of residents. Our latest Bay News 9, News 13, Tampa Bay Times, Graham Center poll showed 83% of likely voters either want some kind of changes or a repeal to the Affordable Care Act altogether. Only 13% wanted to keep it as it is. So here's the question. What should happen next, and what's the Attorney General's role in that process? This is going to be a 60-second response. Bill, we'll start with you.
All right, thank you. Well, that is a hot topic, and I have the unique opportunity today to sit with two sides of that topic. The Attorney General has led the fight against the Affordable Care Act for first 2 years of her term, unsuccessfully for reasons beyond this short discussion, whereas Mr. Sheldon was with the Department of Human Services, who participated in the rollout of healthcare.gov that also had its failures. So uniquely, and also Mr. Sheldon mentioned about the Medicaid donut hole we have, the lack of expansion. I think that we have to face the fact that the Affordable Care Act is the law. The challenges that originated in the Senate to that House, that has failed as well in July. It is the law. The Attorney General has to implement the law, and we also have to reach out to that gap of the poor people who are working and fall in between coverage.
Okay, so our next question comes to us from a viewer. It's about gay marriage. Let's take a listen.
I'd like to know what their positions are in terms of perhaps overturning the gay marriage ban that we have in the state of Florida and actually recognizing the existence of gay marriage and how they perceive that affecting the state.
All right, everybody, this will be a 1-minute answer. Okay, now, Mr. Wohlsifer.
I'm proud to say that I'm with the party that supported gay marriage, same-sex marriage, since 1972, unequivocally. The Democratic Party added it to its plank in 2012. So finally, both establishment parties are coming over. Our courts are coming over. No one said it better than our federal judge in Tallahassee that liberty comes slower for some than others. You know, in 1976, up until 1976, interracial marriages were not allowed. So finally, we're there. The Windsor decision in October 2013, I think, was conclusive on this point. I think the Attorney General exhausted a lot of resources of the citizens of the state by fighting and by appealing 5 losses. I understand that we have a constitutional amendment from 2008, yet because the decision in Windsor was made through the Fifth Amendment under equal protection of the law, incorporated to the states through the 14th Amendment, it was very foreseeable that it would be binding, and I think that the challenge has gone on too far, and it's time to stop.
Thank you. Let's move on. Public corruption. There are those that want to see the public corruption laws in the state beefed up so that state law enforcement could tackle corruption. Is public corruption a problem, a significant problem in Florida, and are our current laws sufficient? We'll start with Mr. Wohlsifer.
Public corruption is obviously a problem in Florida because many polls say that it's the worst in Florida out of the union. And why is that? Well, it's what we call crony capitalism. Insider deals, follow the purse. What can be done? I think a strong view from opposing parties. We have the stronghold of two parties that run this state as well as that run this country. Quick example, public campaign financing applies to the establishment parties but not to third-party candidates. So as long as we have two parties in control, we're not going to be able to penetrate.
Well, let's talk about something else we mentioned earlier. Consumer protection is handled in part, and this is a kind of a weird split in Florida, by the Agricultural Department and the Attorney General's office. Do you see a need to improve consumer protection by the state? And if there is, how would you do it? A 30-second response. Mr. Wohlsifer, you're first.
All right, thank you. I actually think the Attorney General's Attorney General does a great job on consumer protection. As far as dividing it between the Department of Agriculture, where complaints are received, I don't think that is an issue. I think consumer protection is being handled well. As Attorney General, I'd like to meet everyone that's working on that and continue on the path that our Attorney General's been on.
Time now to take a look back at your careers, okay? Are there any decisions that you regret making when it comes to your political or professional career thus far? Mr. Wohlsifer, your turn.
Thank you. I'm proud of my career choices. Making a switch to become a lawyer at age 42, of course, was a tough decision. It was, I'm very proud of that. I brought with my business experience, had the ability to do it financially at the time, and from there I was successful as a lawyer. I'm proud that I practiced in very different areas of law, to be fully rounded, and as far as my political career, I'm proud to not have had one, because I'm ready for that now. I'm at the end of my career. I look forward to serving 2 terms. I owe nothing to no one. My party owes nothing to no one. No special interest, and we are coming up with a clean slate.
Thank you.
The Trayvon Martin case brought a lot of attention to Florida's Stand Your Ground law. Very controversial. I'm wondering, starting with Mr. Sheldon again, do you think it needs any tinkering, any changes? Wohlsifer, what do you think?
Well, thank you. I think there is some tweaking, and there's concerns, particularly with the Supreme Court case that's coming up for oral argument in December. I'm a strong believer in Second Amendment rights. I believe people have affirmative right to protect themselves and their property, and a Stand Your Ground protects them from criminal violations. I'm glad to see that the legislature this last year added the imminent threat allowance for brandishing a weapon, so we don't see harsh results like Melissa Alexandra serving 20 years for firing a warning shot in her own home. But there is a case, the Brother case, coming up before the Supreme Court that purports to switch the burden of proof on the affirmative defense of Stand Your Ground over to the defendant rather than the state, and I hope that we get a right result in that.
Thanks. Let's get started with utilities. Energy policy, utility rates, big issue in Florida, especially in the Tampa Bay area with Duke Energy. What do you think about the Attorney General's office being more active in intervening in some of these rate cases? And we'll start with Mr. Wohlsifer.
Well, we also have legislation that allows for advanced fees to be retained, so in part the legislature has to address that. But what I find curious from my observations as a Floridian since 1985 is the utilities and the Public Service Commission seem to get everything they want every time, always. And there's got to be a reason for that, more of a balance. And I think an introduction of a third party will bring that balance into the debate.
All right, let's take the cameras out to the streets. Again, our next question coming to us from one of our viewers about pill mills. Okay, listen carefully.
Pill mills are a large problem, especially in my area of Pinellas County, and I would like to see how she would handle that and take care of the problems of the pill mills in the city.
All right, you got 60 seconds on this one, Mr. Wohlsifer. We're going to start with you.
Well, pill mill, we're referring here to primarily oxycodone. The Attorney General says we've been eradicated at the pill mill level. That's not the case. Although much has been done, Well, I asked first, how did this arise so much in Florida? How did Florida become where we find 90% or more of this excessive prescription, particularly in South Florida? But you can't just take a hammer where you need a scalpel. A lot of this closing of the pill mills have resulted in increased heroin use. Again, there's no difference between oxycodone and heroin, the same core opioid. Again, I think that access to medicinal marijuana, we have to understand people still have pain. People are going to suffer from pain. They're going to look to alleviate that pain. So we need to free the hands of our physician. The closing of the pill mills has made physicians to the point where they're reluctant to prescribe, and some people are not having access to the medication they need. So I think there was an overreaction. I think we have to change the focus to more of a health issue than a criminal issue, that people are patients, not criminals. This broad attack, I've heard the officers from LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, they say I could shut down every source in the city, they're going to pop back up somewhere else. So we have to take a broader approach.
Let's go ahead and move on and talk about gambling here in the state of Florida, okay? It's time for Florida to open up to Vegas-style gambling. Yes or no, your thoughts?
Well, where our Attorney General sees an increase of casino gambling as an increase in crime, I see it as a increase of opportunity for businesses and jobs, and we need jobs. We can control the crime. There's infrastructure in place to do that. I came from New Jersey, not far from Mr. Sheldon comes from, and saw Atlantic City turn around from pretty much a desolate town to a vibrant resort. So I also see that we've had classes in our society that were suppressed for years, and we've given them advantages so that they can compete in the open market as the Seminoles have. I think that time is, they've had their opportunity, and we should open casino gambling up for entrepreneurs throughout.
Thank you.
Well, we wish we had more time, but our time is coming to an end, so now it's time for our closing statements. We're going to reverse the order. We did it in alphabetical order the first time around. Now we're going to flip it around, which means you got 60 seconds for your closing. Mr. Wohlsifer, you go first.
60 seconds. Thank you very much. And again, thank you for Bright House and Bay News for inviting me to this debate. I'm Bill Wohlsifer. I am the Libertarian candidate. I bring something new to the debate on legal affairs in Florida, and I point out that we have Constitutional Amendment 2 on the ballot. I can win this election because the biggest turnout is going to be for people in favor of Amendment 2. They know I've wrote the Kathy Jordan bill. They know I understand patient access. In fact, our Attorney General has a dereliction of duty for not removing cannabis from Schedule 1 once our legislature found that 0.8% THC level has medicinal value. So our own laws are in conflict. The Attorney General has a role to adjust that. We have a law specifically to do that. I believe that that's why I'm a viable candidate. I point that out because this is the first time we've had a Libertarian candidate for Attorney General, and I look forward to continued discussion between now and